Hi, Echinosaurus Rex, back once again to talk a little bit more about both the dungeons and the dragons. Both at once. So, the last couple of videos I've been talking about encounters, both how not to accidentally massacre your entire party with them, and also how to make them interesting, which kind of go hand in hand as we're talking about ways of essentially making your encounters more interesting rather than just making them difficult, ways of thinking about how you approach encounters and how you go about them as a DM, and also how you can help and inspire your party to think about encounters and go about encounters in a different way, which is going to be a lot of the time a lot more interesting, and also give them that little bit of a jump in terms of finding new cool tactics and new ways to tackle things, which are going to give them a bit of a hand in dealing with some what otherwise might be very difficult creatures for their level. But so we've gone through kind of ways of thinking and ways of approaching, and that's all well and good, but we want some dirty, cheap tricks, below the belt tactics, some quick, fast things that you can drop into an encounter to spice it up, make it more interesting, and really give your party something to think about. So I've got kind of 5 or so ideas which you can throw into your D&D encounters, which are going to be fun and interesting and are going to change the way that you're playing. First off, it is a truth universally acknowledged that everybody gangster until this hits the table. Boom. That is a communal garden sand timer hourglass. And let me tell you, the level and sense of mayhem that this is going to cause, this one simple thing that costs a couple of quid, you can get these all over the place off the internet for next to nothing. And when that bad boy hits the table, 2 things are going to happen. First of all, your party are going to just panic, which frankly is hilarious. Secondly, they are going to completely rethink everything on the spot. Once they've finished having a complete apoplectic fit about the fact that there's suddenly this added element of time pressure to what they're doing, they are going to go, right, okay, efficiency, what can we do? How can we deal with this in the quickest, most straight to the point fashion that we possibly can? And because they know that, something is going to happen once this ticks down. So you can use this in a number of ways, but it will have the same kind of effect on your party. This can be quite good if you're finding that combat's taking a long while to resolve. People are, struggling to get through their turns. Obviously, we don't want to use it to browbeat and rush players because, to be honest, especially people who are newer to D&D or they're playing more complex characters with a lot of different options to do on their turn, it pays to have a little bit of thinking time. But once they've got kind of to a point where they know what they're doing, this can really sort of mix it up for a combat or two. Bear in mind, not everybody responds quite so well to time pressure. I busted this out in an encounter. We'd fought through the swamps. We'd got to an island, and there was a causeway leading up to a mound with a circle of summoning stones on that our bad guy they'd been chasing down was starting to perform a ritual at. The only way to get to him was along a narrow causeway. Demons were being summoned and coming down the causeway and blocking the characters from progressing. That's when this came out. Absolute chaos and mayhem. Everybody's suddenly thinking, okay, we don't want to fight these guys, we want to get past them. And I nearly got mildly divorced as my other half. It hates time pressure and mathematics, and combining the two was just a nightmare for her. So good to be a bit mindful that this can stress people out. Another thing to bear in mind as well as in most tabletop RPGs, in D&D, a round of combat isn't a long period of time. It's a few seconds, 6 specifically for 5th edition, which isn't a very long time at all. And you need to bear in mind that a 6-second combat round takes a lot longer to play out, especially around a table with multiple players, than 6 seconds. It's going to take minutes for one player to take their turn. So be conscious that there's not a direct correlation between this and what's happening in the game world. For example, I have this flip. This is a 10-minute timer. Every time it ran down, I flipped it, and another effect up at the summoning circle took place. A gathering, swirling cloud of black smoke, lightning striking the stones and sparking and filling the air with a reek of decay and ozone. To just to ramp up the tension and ramp up the anticipation. And had my players not gotten to the top and stopped the summoning before the final flip of the timer, well, something would have happened. Something which they will now never find out, because fortunately they managed to pull it off with seconds to spare, which for them, I'm hoping, was a great feeling. But also, you need to be prepared as a GM that if they don't manage to complete it within the time, what's going to happen then? Because that's a real possibility. So I always say the best thing to do as a GM is try to make failure as fun for the players or as interesting for the players as success. So in this case, perhaps rather than taking down a wizard at the top, they would have been fighting a much bigger, more strong and deadly demon. So time pressure is one way you can add interest and craziness to your battles. I'll put that away, it's kind of stressing me out. Another really simple way that, again, is a little bit meta that you can throw into the mix is music, soundtracking. There are plenty of apps out there that you can use for this that are specifically designed for the purpose. Look on any mobile phone app store for RPG sound or whatever, things like Sirenscape. Or you can just build up your own thing, run it from your Amazon Music or Spotify or wherever, build a playlist. And that can really add drama and atmosphere and tension. Do you want a creepy horror theme for a tomb or a mad inventor's workshop? Do you want an epic heroic battle theme to take on the dragon with your mighty paladins? You've got a lot of options there. It is one more thing for a dungeon master to manage, which, if you're fiddling with a playlist at the same time as shuffling your notes, trying to find the stats in your book for the monster that you're about to face, remembering where in the dungeon they are, what actions they've taken, who's still affected by a condition they may have forgotten about, what your friendly NPCs who've tagged along to help might be doing, how they might be reacting, given that there's also a bad guy NPC that's had some sort of interaction, environmental effects, the terrain. Honestly, I don't know how anybody who doesn't have ADHD runs this game. It's a mystery to me. But it's another thing to juggle, but it can be a fun thing to bust out for those special, memorable moments where you want to add more drama and more tension. I mean, I, for one, cannot think of anything that would induce more of a pant-wetting, chill-inducing terror than at the start of a boss fight being told to roll initiative and then hearing just the first opening 2 notes of One Winged Angel. I mean, that's kind of an indicator that shit just got real. Moving away from kind of some meta framing elements, you can do a lot to subvert expectations, and that's a fun way of mixing stuff up mid-battle, especially when your players think they're getting into a straightforward fight with whoever, whatever, and then part way through everything changes, gets flipped on its head. Maybe you are just at the point of defeating a band of gnolls, and you've taken some damage, you're a little low on hit points, but you're okay. You're just coming in for that final blow, and that's when the dragon appears. Big problems. You think you've got the enemy cornered and at a disadvantage, and that's when you realise that you've fallen into their trap. That's when, as a GM, you spring the fact that actually you may have these orcs surrounded, but you're surrounded by ogres. what you're going to do. You know, that makes you rethink your situation. Having tables turn, having something unexpected erupt. Imagine you are hunting down some bandits. You've managed to corner them. You've already gotten a couple of scuffles with them. There's only a handful left, and they throw down their weapons and surrender. You know, we don't want to die. Take us in. We'll face the law. And at that point, the clouds clear, the full moon shines down from above, and those two halfling sheriffs from the village who've accompanied you out here and are paying you to help them make these arrests, lycanthropes. Now, that's unexpected. You can have friends become enemies, allies become useless at a sudden moment. You can flip it on its head and have enemies suddenly given a reason to help you. You know, you can have changing allegiances. You need to be careful utilizing these kind of tactics, especially as if every NPC you have turns on your party, they will never trust anybody ever again, and it will become impossible for you to use any NPC to seed a plot in. Equally, if you're going to have an enemy suddenly turn friend, be aware that most D&D parties with their murdo-hoboistic tendencies may well just shank them anyway, and then that plotline's kind of liable to die a death in the most literal sense. One way that you can do this is by introducing another element. One thing I did recently was we had a battle. Our players stumbled into a goblin scouting party. Handful of goblins, couple of bugbears. Just as it's all kicking off, from the skies, giant wasps. And at this point, everybody, the goblins, the bugbears, and our party, had to evaluate, well, what's the biggest threat? Is it the danger from the skies posed by these horrible, gigantic, poisonous creatures, or is it the original threat? As did the goblins and bugbears. And when you've got that target priority, who's helping who, our enemies are fighting our other enemies, it becomes a bit more confused. It becomes a bit more interesting. I would say it's going to be difficult if you're going to try and convince your party to, survive by working together with their hated nemesis of many, many sessions. There's a good chance that they're just going to job them. And that's something you need to be prepared for. It sounds like a great idea, setting up a scenario where your players will have to choose between certain death in the face of a much greater threat and working with their nemesis to avoid being killed. But there's a good likelihood in that scenario that your players are going to just get themselves killed. So that is something you need to be careful of. Fourth idea I've come up with would involve, and this can be frustrating, this kind of ties back into the switch mid battle, but this comes a little earlier. An enemy that your players can't kill or don't want to kill for some reason. Perhaps that halfling sheriff that's just transformed into a werewolf before their very eyes is a trusted and old friend of the party who's got them a lot of jobs. Maybe it's just the guy that's going to be needing to be alive to pay them when this is all over. Perhaps it's another NPC that they're rescuing. Perhaps it's an evil character that they would love to kill and need to kill, but because they're in a terrible blood magic circle, anybody who dies in there will fuel that ritual and cause an even bigger problem. How do they deal with that? So that is instantly going to flip your party's tactics on their head, and they're going to have to start thinking, well, how do we move people around the battlefield? How do we get them out of this radius? How do we capture or take down what would normally be a friendly person who is perhaps mind controlled, maybe even a member of the party? That's devious. How do they deal with that without just resorting to immediate battle axe to the face tactics? That gives them a lot of interesting things to think about. And they may well end up having to kill somebody they didn't necessarily want to and face the consequences of that. But that can make for an interesting story too. And finally, my fifth and final cheap trick to spice up a combat encounter: the puzzle battle. And anybody who's played any number of video games has probably encountered this 1,000,001 times already, so it's maybe not a terribly original idea, but it can lend itself to a lot of fun. If you make an enemy that the players can't simply kill through force of arms, but they have to utilize some other mechanic to deal with them. So, say, for example, liches are a great version of this. You can stab a lich, decapitate it, set it on fire. Great, but if you ain't going to destroy its phylactery, that's not going to do you a fat lot of good. Other ways you could do this: imagine having some minions who are running around and funneling health into your big bad sorcerer to keep him topped up with hit points even as your party are pummeling him. They're going to have to go and take those minions down and split their attention. Perhaps there's 4 crystal pillars filled with necrotic or radiant energy, which every time your bad guy gets hurt, they're going to zap into him and bring him back up. What are they going to do about that? Can they destroy these pillars? Can they dispel the magic in them? Can they somehow block him from receiving it? Can they maybe even draw that energy to target themselves? Maybe moving away from health top-up mechanics, which can be really, really frustrating and irritating if any of the games I've played with that kind of thing are anything to go by. Maybe it's an enemy that you can't hurt, but the skin's too thick, it's too heavily armoured. Maybe you have to do something to remove that armour, remove that immunity. Maybe you have to lure it into the area of a lava pit, an acid pool, a trap that shoots flame or lightning damage, which can injure it. Perhaps there's a tool or a device or something which you need to be able to deal damage to it, or to utilise to put it into a vulnerable state where normal damage will work. This can be a little bit tricky for a couple of reasons. If you've got one particular object that works, I'm thinking kind of in a Zelda-esque fashion, you need a specific tool. We've all had those Zelda boss battles where you're like, why am I so filled with rage and frustration? Why won't you just die? And then you find the corkscrew of Shaznadar, and that allows you to uncork its left nipple so that you can do damage and pour it. I don't even know. But that can be pretty frustrating if you can't work that out. And it can be pretty dull if there's only one thing that can do that and one player's got that and basically the others are sat there drumming their fingers out of the fight. So that's something to bear in mind when you're designing that kind of a puzzle fight for your party. The other issue could be you may well need to telegraph a lot harder than you expect. There's a mindset that kind of comes with the expectations of playing a game, especially something like D&D, where it's had a long history of a set format of, you kick the door in, you shank the kobolds, and you steal their TV. That's all there is to it. That's not what it's about, but that's kind of a style of play that it's easy to fall into. It fits a lot of tropes and so on. And if we want to do something a little bit more interesting than that, you may find you need to telegraph that to your party a little stronger, have more hints and prompts perhaps ready to sort of nudge them in a particular direction so that they don't just all die and then they're really angry. Why did you put us up against a monster that we physically had no chance of beating? Like, well, if you just pulled this switch that you weren't paying any attention to, maybe you need some more prompting. So that's 5 ideas I've had for throwing into a combat encounter to spice things up, keep them interesting, and ultimately lead to some more memorable and fun encounters where you can have a little bit more creativity and or potentially just give your players a panic attack. Thank you very much.